Inflation is supposed to be a tide that lifts all boats. Prices go up at the store, but those higher revenues get passed on to the factors of production. And so you also see an equivalent increase in your paycheck. That's how it's supposed to work. But in practice, prices go up at the store well before you get a cost of living raise at work. The prices of the economic factors of production tend to adjust slowly, whereas the prices of goods and services tend to adjust quickly. This unevenness can distort economic incentives and lead to the overuse of resources. Likewise, deflation follows the same pattern, shrinking revenues, but not the costs of production, leading to an underuse of resources. When we say the short run, we mean the time it takes for inflation or deflation to make its way through the entire economy. The short run is essentially the time it takes for changes in the price level to go from showing up at the store to showing up in your paycheck. Let's translate our example with an economy only producing burgers into our model for aggregate supply. According to the classical school, aggregate supply is a vertical line because when the price level changes, it results in immediate changes in the price of inputs. I'm using our technical jargon here, so let me clarify that real quick. The factors of production are broad categories of resources: labor, land and natural resources, capital, meaning tools and machines, and entrepreneurship. The quote, price of each factor of production is the income that is paid to each one. The price of labor is wages. The price of land and natural resources is what economists call rent, even though that word means something different to regular people. The price of capital, which again is not financial capital, but rather the tools we use to make things, is interest. And the price of entrepreneurship is profits. In the classical model, when the price level falls, it corresponds to the price of the burger falling. And since each burger is fetching a lower price now, each factor of production has to adjust their share of the proceeds. The deflation here immediately translates into falling wages, rent, interest, and profits. And we saw in a previous video why that's okay, because everyone is still able to afford the same things they could afford before. No one is worse off, and no one is better off. When prices and wages are flexible, the economy responds well to a bout of deflation or inflation. But what Keynes noted is that even though the incentives people face are to adjust these prices and wages quickly, people don't seem keen on following those incentives. No one likes getting a pay cut, and most bosses don't want to give one, not just for fear of lowered morale, but because telling someone you're cutting their salary isn't a very fun thing to do. And the same goes for these other factors of production. If a decrease in the price level lowers the price a business can charge for a burger, but it doesn't lower their costs, then the burden of deflation falls on profits. In order to stay in business, production will have to be reduced, producing only what is profitable, which means unemployment and lower real GDP. And so, on our graph, we can't stay on our aggregate supply line. As prices fall, real GDP falls too in the fallout. And so to connect these dots, aggregate supply can no longer be vertical. The amount we can produce depends on the price level, so long as we experience sticky prices and wages. It's easier to raise wages than it is to lower them, and so short-run aggregate supply is often drawn like this, which gets more resistant to price changes as you move down it, and less resistant as you move up. But it is important to note that this is still aggregate supply. This is still describing the amount of real GDP the economy can produce with the resources and technology we have. For this reason, SRAS will always tag along when there's a change in long-run aggregate supply. That is, if LRAS shifts, SRAS will shift to and in the same direction. But SRAS has another assumption added to it. Imperfect competition makes input prices, for example, wages, sticky, particularly with respect to deflation. This means that if those input prices get unstuck, short-run aggregate supply will shift to accommodate the change. When we add aggregate demand to our graph, we are able to determine the price level and real GDP for the economy. SRAS will shift when there are changes to the cost of production, which change input prices. For example, if the economy sees increasing costs due to higher average wages or higher costs for capital, then SRAS will shift to the left. Higher costs decrease supply. You can see that the result is a higher price level and a lower level of real GDP. Resetting, we can also see an example of what happens when there are decreasing costs. Lower costs are a boon for business. They increase short-run aggregate supply, shifting it to the right, and the result is a lower price level and a higher real GDP. Without LRAS, though, we can't tell whether this is a good thing or not. We don't know if the economy is still falling short of its potential and experiencing high unemployment, or if the economy is overheating and gobbling up resources too quickly, inviting rapid inflation. But at least now we have all the tools we need to figure it out.